You saw her once not in flesh, but in flame, a silhouette framed by golden pillars, standing still while the world moved around her. You didn't speak, you didn't need to. The air bent in reverence, and your soul bowed without command. But do you remember what happened next? The moment you looked too long, when the statue's eyes turned hollow and the marble mouth began to move. It didn't smile, it didn't welcome, it judged. There is a kind of silence that surrounds certain women, not peace, but absence. You mistook that for divinity. You thought worship was the highest form of love, but the temple was empty, and still you kept praying. Why do you kneel before what does not ask to be knelt to? Why do you crave the gaze of someone whose essence you've never touched? Something ancient in you wants to serve, but you've forgotten whom. She is not the goddess, she is the mirror, and you are the one who built the altar. You built her from fragments not of her, but of you. A glance became prophecy, a sigh became scripture. The way she turned away from you became a lesson you never questioned. You mistook every silence for depth, every refusal for grace, every curve of her shadow for a virtue you lacked. But she never told you to kneel, she never asked to be crowned. It was your poverty that anointed her, your hunger that sculpted her into something more than human. You took what you feared, and you called it beauty. You took what you couldn't control, and you called it mystery. You took your own powerlessness, and you dressed it in perfume and illusion. She became divine not because she was, but because you abdicated. The moment you placed her above you, she ceased to see you, not out of cruelty, but necessity. Gods do not look downward. And you taught her to ascend. You offered your dignity first, not your strength. You did not bring her the iron of your spine, but the softness of your worship. And so she walked past you, not as a tyrant, but as a consequence. You thought the temple was sacred, but it was only hollow. You brought offerings to an altar that had no priest, no presence, only echoes of your own projection. Your love was not love. It was a form of self-erasure, a devotion to your own delusion. You wanted her to need you as you needed her, but gods do not need, and idols do not weep. She watched you kneel and felt the instinct not of affection, but distance. Worship creates height, and height kills intimacy. In your adoration, you turned her into something she could not sustain. No woman, no matter how radiant, can live forever inside the myth you've wrapped her in. She will grow tired, she will grow bitter, she will begin to feel the weight of your projections as chains around her being. What you call respect, she will feel as suffocation. What you name honor, she will know as escape. You do not love her, you love the role you assign to her, and you do not see her. You see the mirror of your own hunger for meaning, beauty, transcendence. You wanted a goddess because you abandoned your form as man. You emptied yourself and called it love. You stripped yourself of judgment, of resistance, of critique, and thought it made you worthy. But your absence of spine did not make you noble. It made you invisible. She wants to be seen, not revered. She wants to be known, not sanctified. To be desired by a man who does not need to kneel. You thought you were loving her more by diminishing yourself. But she cannot desire what does not stand. And your knees, once bent, became habit. You forgot how to rise. There is tragedy in your eyes, not because you were deceived, but because you offered your soul to a fantasy and called it sacrifice. You believed love meant surrender, that goodness meant obedience, that femininity demanded adoration. You misread the essence of woman as fragile. You did not see the storm, you did not see the fire, You only saw a stage for your worship, and so you loved wrongly, blindly, deeply, but never fully. The gods you imagined her to be have long fled. The echo you chase is not hers, it is yours. And the altar you built is not for her, it is your tomb. In the quiet corners of your memory, you remember the first time you placed her above. It was not her fault. She did not ask to be deified, but she learned quickly what power worship brings. She learned to withhold, to float instead of walk, to turn her absence into currency. She learned how to rule without speaking because you handed her the throne before she earned it. You mistook charm for character, presence for principle, beauty for virtue. And now, she no longer speaks to you, not because she changed, but because she saw what you are willing to become. A servant of your own illusion, a man who confuses love with subjugation. She does not want your crown. She wants your gaze, clear, undistracted, equal. But you cannot look at her now without trembling, without searching for signs, meanings, omens. She is no longer a person, she is a shrine. And you are the blind monk circling her steps, whispering prayers to a silence that never replies. What frightens you most is not her rejection, but the possibility that she never wanted what you gave, that your sacrifices were unrequested, that your tenderness was a cage, that your endless exaltation was a form of cowardice, not care. You think women punish men for being kind? No, they punish them for being empty, for wrapping themselves in politeness as disguise for lack of gravity, for mistaking the performance of reverence with the presence of strength, for replacing eros with obedience, desire with distance. You cannot be chosen if you dissolve in front of her. You cannot be loved if you are not seen, and you cannot be seen if you do not stand. She is not the goddess. She is the test, not of worship, but of balance. To see her clearly, you must first see yourself without distortion. To approach her truly, you must bring not your worship, but your form. To love her rightly, you must stop kneeling. There is a truth buried in the bones of every man who worships, a silence he avoids, a fear he hides, that if he stopped bowing he would be rejected, that if he dared to meet her gaze, she would not find him enough. But it is only in standing that you become visible, only in presence that you become real, and only in refusing to kneel that she might, for the first time, truly see you. She speaks in riddles not because she is lost, but because she has no need to explain. You, on the other hand, crave explanations like bread. You demand a structure behind her silence, a principle behind her laughter, a blueprint for her desire. But she is not your theorem. She is not a puzzle to be solved. You call her irrational, yet it is your mind that cannot sit still in ambiguity. You crave logic where nature has embedded rhythm. You seek clarity where essence has chosen paradox. And in doing so, you make her less than she is. Beneath what you call chaos lies a form of order you were never taught to see. It does not move in lines. It does not obey your syllogisms. It spirals, it curves, it multiplies in layers. Her presence is not contradiction, it is depth. But you were trained to see deviation from your map as disorder. So when she laughed at your seriousness, you felt belittled. When she changed her mind, you called her unstable. When she loved you fiercely and then pulled away, you called her manipulative. You did not see the pattern because the pattern was not yours. You are terrified by what you cannot predict. You call that love. Love is not an equation. It is not symmetry. Love is telos, not control. But you prefer worship because it is safer than wonder. Worship creates distance. Wonder creates intimacy. And wonder, if faced directly, would require you to let go of your definitions, your frames, your tightly clenched beliefs about what a woman should be. She is not your opposite. She is not your other half. She is the curve in your line, the moon in your reason, the instinct buried under centuries of logic. You built your soul on stone. She moves through water, and now you're drowning in what you refuse to understand. You thought you needed to fix her, that if only she were more consistent, more stable, more aligned to your categories, then things would make sense. But sense is your idol, not hers. Her world is not built on facts, but forces, not arguments, but atmosphere, not proof, but pulse. She sees what you overlook, not with eyes, but with tension, not with mind, but with attunement. And you call that irrational because it threatens your superiority. You fear what she knows without speaking. You call it manipulation. You call it sorcery. But it is simply perception that doesn't pass through the filter of your words. Her knowing is older than yours. It is cellular. It is mythic. It is animal. And it cannot be domesticated by logic. You want her to tell you the truth in your language. She never will, because she is the embodiment of a different grammar, one you forgot when you started believing only what you could explain. You punish her for moving with the wind, but it is you who chose to live in a box. She adapts. You preserve. She flows. You defend. She transforms. You resist, and yet you think she is the one who needs healing. No. She does not want to be worshipped, because worship flattens her. You cannot love her as divine without stripping her of her mortal intelligence. And she is not a symbol. She is a force, a principle of becoming, of chaos as genesis. You want her to be calm, controlled, safe, so that you can avoid confronting your own unstructured soul. But she will never be tamed. Not truly. And every time you mistake her freedom for rebellion, her emotion for weakness, her silence for approval, she dies a little inside. Not because you don't love her, but because you love your version of her more. You thought love meant direction. For her, it means presence. You thought harmony meant agreement. For her, it means tension held without collapse. You thought she was lost because she didn't follow your map, but she has her own terrain, one made of cycles, not lines, of intuition, not logic, of emergence, not order. You do not have to understand her, but you do have to stop reducing her. What frightens you is not her unpredictability, it's what it reveals about your fragility. You can recite Aristotle, build empires of thought, categorize the stars, and still feel shattered by a single look she gives that you cannot interpret. That is not her power. That is your limitation. She is not chaos, she is cosmos, but a cosmos too vast for your current eye. So you kneel, not because she is divine, but because you do not know how else to relate to a being who moves without permission. You choose reverence over recognition, distance over dialogue, idealization over intimacy, and in doing so, you abandon logos not because of her, but because of your refusal to grow. She does not need to be explained. She needs to be witnessed, not through the lens of worship, but through the courage of presence, through the stillness that can hold her shifts without turning them into crimes, through the strength that does not flinch when met with her fullness. There is order beneath her chaos, but it is not your order. It is older, wiser, non-linear, and it does not ask to be named, only met. She does not want to be worshipped. She wants to be real, and she cannot be real to you as long as you see her through the haze of your fear, your control, your pedestal. Do you want to know what she truly desires? Not your admiration, not your vows, not your loyalty. She wants your clarity, your presence unclouded by fear, your will, not your flattery, your truth, not your praise. And until you bring that, she will remain a mystery, not because she hides, but because you refuse to see. You believed that by lifting her above yourself, you were protecting her, that by surrendering your power, you were proving your worth. But reverence, when it comes from fear, is not love. It is disguise, a silent confession that you do not feel equal. You mask it with compliments, with obedience, with soft eyes and eager hands. But beneath it all is a secret hunger to be accepted without having to be tested, to be chosen without having to be seen. And so you elevate her not to worship, but to hide from her, from yourself. There is a strange violence in your gentleness, not the violence of hand or word, but of disappearance. You erase yourself to become pleasing. You offer your mind on a silver plate, your opinion clipped and dulled, your presence smoothed down until it offends nothing. But she notices. Oh, she notices. Not consciously, not always, but her instincts recoil, because the man who reveres cannot possess. The man who worships does not touch, and you think this makes you safe. But safety without gravity is not intimacy. She wants to feel your presence collide with hers, not in conflict, but in clarity. She does not want you to vanish. She wants you to stand, and you, terrified of confrontation, trained to see dominance in all strength, mistake this for rejection. You think she pulls away because you're too intense, too opinionated, too forceful. No, she pulls away because you are missing. She tests not your politeness, but your substance. And when she finds only air, only softness, only admiration, she knows you cannot hold her. Reverence becomes tyranny when it expects reward. You pretend to adore without condition, but in truth, you're always waiting to be loved in return, to be validated, to be chosen because you were different, because you were better, because you didn't demand. But love is not a transaction, and admiration is not a virtue when it conceals the fear of rejection. You think your gentleness is the antidote to aggression, that you are not like those other men, the bold ones, the loud ones, the ones who dare to want. But your gentleness is not strength. It is self-erasure dressed in manners. It is cowardice polished into patience. You do not pursue her, you wait to be granted. You do not claim not with violence, but with vision. You simply orbit, hoping to be noticed. And what kind of man lives like that? Not one with logos, not one with telos, not one who embodies his form and enters the world with weight, but a shadow, a reflection of other men, a reversal, not a revelation. She sees it, not always with clarity, but with discomfort. She feels the pressure of your worship, and it makes her smaller. Your reverence becomes a burden she never asked to carry. She does not want your pedestal. She wants your participation. She wants to be met, not obeyed. You project purity onto her because you are ashamed of your own desire. You hide it behind honor, call it respect. But it leaks out in ways you can't control, in quiet envy, in emotional neediness, in the hunger to be seen as good. But goodness is not love, and love without eros, without tension, without polarity becomes maternal. You force her into the role of the caretaker because you refuse to be the man. You want her to affirm you, to make you feel chosen, to fix the wound you carry in silence. But she cannot mother what will not grow. This is the tyranny of reverence. It demands from her what you refuse to become. It begs her to complete you, without ever showing her your full, imperfect self. You want to be forgiven without sinning, loved without risking, worshipped without bleeding. But no woman, no matter how kind, can love what hides. You confuse sacrifice with sincerity. But the man who gives too much, too quickly, too desperately is not noble. He is escaping, hoping that by burying his needs, his hunger, his presence, he will become acceptable. But your disappearance is not romantic. It is a lie, and women feel lies in their bones. She doesn't hate you. She resents what you became, because she knows, somewhere beneath your performance of love, there is a man who could have stood beside her not as a priest, but as a partner. She aches for that man, not the one who folds, who flatters, who flinches, but the one who can hold contradiction without trembling, who can speak the truth even if it risks the fantasy. The man who refuses to kneel, not out of arrogance, but because he knows his own worth. You do not have to be cruel, but you must stop being invisible. You must stop confusing approval with affection, obedience with love, worship with presence. She does not want to be adored. She wants to be seen, and she cannot be seen by a man who no longer sees himself. If she is the mirror, then your reverence reflects only absence. You admire what you do not understand, because you hope it will save you. But nothing saves you, not her, not love, not virtue. You are alone with your form, with your fear, with the path you must walk if you ever hope to be chosen, not out of pity, not out of patience, but out of deep recognition. She is not your salvation. She is the gate, and you cannot enter through worship, only through becoming. There is no glory in disappearing, no virtue in silence that fears rejection. She will not open to the man who places her on an altar. She will open only to the one who can stand while still desiring, speak while still listening, lead without erasing. The world taught you that strength is violence, that masculinity is danger, that reverence is safe. But reverence that comes from fear is just another form of manipulation, a prettier one, a quieter one, but still control, still an attempt to be loved without risk, still a form of cowardice. So stop praying, stand, let her fall in love with your spine, not your shadow. Let her test the man who does not flinch when she rages, who does not vanish when she changes, who does not kneel when she withholds. Let her feel the man who remains. Worship is a cage, and you built it for both of you. Now break it, or remain alone in your own illusion, still waiting, still kneeling, still unseen. There is a room in you no one enters. It is not locked, but you always lead them elsewhere. Brighter halls, safer corridors. The temple you built for her stands just outside that room, grand, silent, empty. She lingers at its steps, not out of reverence, but out of confusion. She touches the stone. It is cold, perfect, dead. She did not ask to be worshipped. She asked to be met. Inside that room, the one you hide, lies the man who could have done it. Not the kneeler, not the priest. The one who would not beg, the one who would not vanish, the one who carries fire, not flowers. Will you open it, or will you keep lighting candles in front of statues that never speak back? Praying to women who once looked at you and turned away in silence.